In the realm of second chances and human transformation, there are stories so remarkable they challenge our fundamental assumptions about redemption, forgiveness, and the capacity for change that lies within every human heart. Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom has witnessed countless tales of personal growth and moral awakening, but none quite like the one that would unfold on a bright spring morning when a young man named Anthony Rivera would walk through those doors, carrying not just a citation, but a story of transformation so profound it would surprise even the most compassionate judge and remind everyone present that the greatest victories in life often come not from avoiding mistakes, but from learning to rise above them. 24-year-old Anthony Rivera stood in the courthouse waiting area, his appearance markedly different from the last time he had been in a courtroom 18 months earlier. Gone were the defiant posture, the expensive street clothes, and the cocky demeanor that had characterized his previous encounters with the justice system. The young man, who sat quietly reviewing his paperwork, wore a simple but neat button-down shirt, clean jeans, and carried himself with the kind of humble confidence that comes from someone who has learned difficult lessons and emerged stronger from the experience. The citation that brought Anthony to Judge Caprio's courtroom was minor, a parking violation that had occurred while he was attending classes at the Community College of Rhode Island. The irony wasn't lost on Anthony that he was appearing in court for something as mundane as expired meter time, especially considering the serious charges he had faced in the past. But this parking ticket represented something much more significant than a simple administrative violation. It was evidence of the completely transformed life Anthony had built from the ashes of his troubled past. To understand the magnitude of Anthony's transformation, it was necessary to know where his journey had begun. 3 years earlier, Anthony had been a high school dropout involved with a local gang, dealing drugs on the streets of South Providence, and headed down a path that seemed destined to end in prison or worse. He had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, positive role models were rare, and the fastest way to respect and money appeared to be through illegal activities that offered immediate gratification but long-term destruction. Anthony's first serious encounter with the legal system had come when he was 21, arrested for possession with intent to distribute cocaine in a case that could have resulted in significant prison time. The young man who had appeared before Judge Martinez in Superior Court that day had been angry, unrepentant, and convinced that the system was rigged against people like him. He had accepted a plea bargain that included 2 years of probation, community service, and mandatory drug counseling, requirements he had initially viewed as obstacles to getting back to his previous lifestyle rather than opportunities for genuine change. But sometimes life intervenes in unexpected ways, and for Anthony Rivera, that intervention came in the form of Maria Santos, a probation officer who refused to give up on young people even when they had given up on themselves. Maria had seen something in Anthony during their first meeting. Beneath the anger and defensiveness, she recognized intelligence, leadership potential, and a deep pain that manifested as rage against a world he felt had never given him a fair chance. Over the course of his probation, Maria had challenged Anthony in ways no adult ever had. She didn't lecture him about right and wrong or threaten him with consequences for poor choices. Instead, she asked him questions that forced him to examine his own motivations and goals. What did he want his life to look like in 5 years? Did he want children someday? And if so, what kind of father did he want to be? What would his grandmother, who had raised him and passed away when he was 17, think about the path he was choosing? The turning point in Anthony's transformation had come during his court-ordered community service at a local elementary school, where he was assigned to help with after-school tutoring and recreational activities. Initially resentful about having to spend his time with little kids, Anthony gradually discovered that he had a natural ability to connect with children, especially those from backgrounds similar to his own. The kids responded to his authenticity and street credibility, while he began to see himself through their admiring eyes and realized he could be someone worth looking up to. Working with children who faced many of the same challenges he had experienced growing up, absent fathers, mothers working multiple jobs, neighborhoods where violence and drugs were constant threats, Anthony began to understand how his own choices affected not just his future, but the futures of young people who might follow his example. He started to see that his influence could be used for positive change rather than destruction, and that realization became the foundation for a complete transformation of his life and priorities. As his probation period progressed, Anthony had completed his GED, enrolled in college courses, and gradually distanced himself from the friends and activities that had defined his previous lifestyle. The process hadn't been easy. Changing your life means changing everything, including relationships with people who don't want to see you grow beyond the role they've assigned you. Anthony had faced ridicule from former associates who accused him of going soft and selling out, but he had also discovered new relationships with people who supported his growth and celebrated his achievements. The parking violation that now brought Anthony back to court had occurred during his second semester at community college, where he was studying social work with the goal of becoming a probation officer like Maria Santos. He had been running, late for a criminal justice class, the irony of which wasn't lost on him, and had fed the parking meter only enough money for what he thought would be a quick class session. When the professor had extended the discussion about rehabilitation versus punishment in the criminal justice system, Anthony had stayed to participate in a debate that he found personally meaningful, only to return to his car to find the citation, tucked under his windshield wiper. Under normal circumstances, Anthony would have simply paid the $40 parking fine without thinking twice about it. But his current financial situation made even small, unexpected expenses challenging. As a full-time student working part-time at a youth center, Anthony's income was limited, and every dollar was carefully budgeted for tuition, books, rent, and basic living expenses. The parking fine represented money he had planned to spend on textbooks for his upcoming semester, and the timing couldn't have been worse. But Anthony's decision to contest the parking citation wasn't motivated primarily by financial concerns. After researching his options, he had discovered that he could request a hearing to explain the circumstances of the violation, and he saw this as an opportunity to practice the kind of advocacy skills he would need in his future career as a social worker. He also wanted to test his own growth by appearing in a courtroom setting and demonstrating the progress he had made since his last encounter with the justice system. The Anthony Rivera who prepared for his court appearance was methodical and responsible in ways that would have been unrecognizable to the young man he had been 3 years earlier. He researched court procedures, prepared a brief explanation of his circumstances, and even practiced his presentation with Maria Santos, who had remained his mentor and friend long after his probation had ended. Most importantly, he approached the hearing not with the adversarial attitude that had characterized his previous legal encounters, but with respect for the process and hope that his explanation would be fairly considered. As Anthony sat in the courthouse that morning, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The young man who had once viewed the legal system as his enemy now planned to work within that system to help other troubled youth find better paths for their lives. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal, moral, and spiritual, representing a complete reorientation of his values, goals, and understanding of his place in the world. The Anthony Rivera, who had emerged from the wreckage of his troubled youth, was a testament to the transformative power of authentic mentorship, genuine opportunity, and most importantly, an individual's decision to take responsibility for changing the trajectory of his own life. The journey from street-level drug dealer to college student studying social work had been neither quick nor easy, requiring Anthony to confront not just his past actions, but the deep-seated beliefs and survival mechanisms that had led him down such a destructive path in the first place. Anthony's childhood in South Providence had been marked by the absence of his father, who had been incarcerated when Anthony was 6 years old for armed robbery, and the overwhelming presence of his grandmother, Elena Rivera, who had taken on the responsibility of raising her grandson while his mother struggled with addiction and instability. Elena had been a force of nature, a small woman who cleaned office buildings at night and took care of Anthony during the day, always emphasizing the importance of education, respect, and staying away from the street life that had claimed so many young men in their neighborhood. But Elena's influence, though powerful, had competed with the daily reality of growing up in an environment where academic achievement was often mocked as acting white, where legitimate job opportunities were scarce, and where the drug trade offered not just money but status, protection, and a sense of belonging that was difficult to find elsewhere. When Elena passed away from diabetes complications during Anthony's senior year of high school, the grief and sense of abandonment that followed had pushed him fully into the street life he had been flirting with since middle school. The 3 years between Elena's death and Anthony's arrest had been a blur of increasingly serious criminal activity. What had started as selling small amounts of marijuana to classmates had escalated to dealing cocaine and crack in quantities that attracted the attention of both rival dealers and law enforcement. Anthony had convinced himself that he was being smart about his illegal activities, that he was different from the addicts he sold to and the violent criminals who controlled the drug trade in his area. But the reality was that he had become exactly what his grandmother had warned him against, another young man throwing away his potential for the illusion of easy money and street credibility. The arrest that had ultimately saved Anthony's life had come during a routine traffic stop that revealed 2 ounces of cocaine in his vehicle, an amount that placed him firmly in the distribution category rather than simple possession. The police officers who arrested him had been professional, but unsympathetic, having seen dozens of young men like Anthony pass through the system without learning from their experiences. The judge who had sentenced him had been similarly clinical, offering the standard options of prison time or probation with conditions, without any apparent expectation that Anthony would choose rehabilitation over recidivism. It was Maria Santos, the probation officer assigned to Anthony's case, who had first suggested that his anger and defensiveness might be covering up fear and pain rather than genuine indifference to his situation. During their initial meeting, when Anthony had slouched in his chair and responded to her questions with monosyllabic answers and obvious disrespect, Maria had surprised him by saying, "You remind me of my son at your age, smart enough to know better, angry enough to pretend he doesn't care, and scared enough to push away anyone who tries to help him." The comparison had caught Anthony off guard because it suggested that Maria saw him as a whole person rather than just another case, file, and more importantly, that she saw potential in him that he had stopped seeing in himself. Over the following weeks, Maria had proven that her interest in Anthony's success was genuine by showing up to his community service assignments, checking on his progress in drug counseling, and asking detailed questions about his goals and plans that forced him to think beyond his immediate circumstances. The community service assignment at Roosevelt Elementary School had been Maria's idea, based on her belief that Anthony needed to see himself as someone capable of positive influence, rather than just destruction. His initial resistance to working with children had been overcome by the practical reality that refusing the assignment would likely result in jail time. But his transformation from reluctant volunteer to passionate mentor had surprised everyone, including Anthony himself. Working with children from backgrounds similar to his own, Anthony had been forced to confront the impact of his choices not just on his own future, but on the community where he had grown up. 8-year-old Miguel, whose father was in prison for drug dealing, looked up to Anthony with the kind of hero worship that made Anthony realize he could either reinforce the cycle of criminal behavior or help break it. 10-year-old Sophia, whose mother worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat, needed help with homework that Anthony found himself eager to provide, discovering that he actually enjoyed teaching and had a talent for explaining complex concepts in ways children could understand. The moment that had crystallized Anthony's commitment to changing his life had come when Miguel had asked him, with the innocent directness that only children possess, "Anthony, are you going to go to jail like my daddy did?" The question had hit Anthony like a physical blow, forcing him to realize that his choices weren't just affecting his own future, but were being watched and potentially emulated by children who had few positive male role models in their lives. From that day forward, Anthony had approached his probation requirements not as obstacles to be endured, but as opportunities to build the foundation for a completely different kind of life. He had completed his GED with determination rather than reluctance, earning scores high enough to qualify for college admission and surprising his former teachers who remembered him as a student with potential who had chosen not to apply himself. The drug counseling sessions that he had initially attended just to meet his legal obligations had become genuine opportunities for self-reflection and growth, as Anthony worked to understand the emotional and psychological factors that had contributed to his poor decision-making. The process of distancing himself from his former lifestyle had been one of the most difficult aspects of Anthony's transformation. Friends who had been partners in illegal activities felt betrayed by his decision to go legitimate, while family members who had benefited financially from his drug dealing were skeptical about his commitment to change and resentful of his implicit criticism of their own choices. Anthony had found himself essentially starting over socially, building new relationships with people who supported his goals rather than undermining them. Enrolling in college had required not just academic preparation, but significant financial sacrifice. Without the illegal income that had previously supported him, Anthony had to work part-time jobs while carrying a full course load, carefully budgeting every expense and applying for financial aid that barely covered his basic educational costs. The parking violation that had brought him back to court had occurred during his second semester, when he was taking 18 credit hours while working 25 hours a week at the youth center, where he had been volunteering since completing his community service. The young man who prepared for his court appearance was methodical in ways that reflected the discipline and responsibility he had developed through his transformation process. He had researched the relevant parking regulations, documented the circumstances that had led to his violation, and prepared a respectful explanation that acknowledged his responsibility while providing context for his actions. Most importantly, he approached the hearing with the kind of mature perspective that viewed the court system not as an adversary but as an institution deserving of respect and cooperation. Anthony's decision to request a hearing rather than simply paying the fine had been motivated partly by financial necessity, but also by his desire to practice the communication and advocacy skills he would need in his chosen career. As someone who planned to work with troubled youth, he understood that he would frequently need to explain complex situations to judges, social workers, and other professionals, and he saw this parking citation hearing as an opportunity to develop those abilities in a relatively low-stakes environment. The night before his court appearance, Anthony had reflected on how dramatically his relationship with the justice system had changed since his criminal case 3 years earlier. Where he had once felt victimized and persecuted by legal proceedings, he now felt grateful for a system that had provided him with alternatives to incarceration and opportunities for rehabilitation. His respect for the process, his preparation for the hearing, and his genuine remorse for any inconvenience his violation might have caused reflected a fundamental shift in his understanding of civic responsibility and personal accountability. "Anthony Rivera," the court clerk announced, and the young man rose from his seat with the kind of composed confidence that comes from someone who has learned to face difficult situations with dignity and preparation. As he walked toward Judge Caprio's bench, Anthony's measured steps and respectful posture immediately caught the attention of court officers who were accustomed to seeing defendants approach with either defiance or obvious anxiety. There was something different about this young man, a quality of quiet determination and genuine respect for the proceedings that suggested his appearance in court was more than just a routine citation hearing. Judge Caprio looked up as Anthony approached, immediately noting the professional appearance and respectful demeanor of the defendant. In his decades of experience, the judge had developed an intuitive ability to read people quickly, and something about Anthony Rivera suggested that there was more to this parking violation case than typically met the eye. The young man's neat appearance, his careful preparation of documents, and most tellingly, his direct eye contact and respectful posture indicated someone who took the court proceedings seriously and had come prepared to engage meaningfully with the process. "Good morning, Mr. Rivera," Judge Caprio said warmly, his voice carrying the combination of authority and kindness that had made him beloved by millions. "I see you're here to contest a parking violation. Please tell me what happened." Anthony straightened slightly and looked directly at the judge as he began to speak, his voice clear and respectful. "Good morning, Your Honor. Thank you for taking the time to hear my case. I received this citation while attending classes at the Community College of Rhode Island, and I'd like to explain the circumstances that led to the violation." The articulate response and formal tone immediately impressed Judge Caprio, who was accustomed to hearing defendants begin their explanations with excuses or attempts to minimize their responsibility. Anthony's approach suggested someone who understood the gravity of court proceedings and was prepared to take full accountability for his actions while providing context for his situation. "Please go ahead," Judge Caprio encouraged, leaning forward slightly to indicate his full attention. Anthony took a breath and continued with the kind of organized presentation that reflected careful preparation and genuine respect for the court's time. "Your Honor, I was attending a criminal justice class that ran longer than expected due to an extended discussion about rehabilitation in the justice system. I had fed the parking meter for what I thought would be sufficient time. But when the class discussion continued, I made the decision to stay and participate rather than leave to feed the meter." Judge Caprio's eyebrows raised slightly at the mention of criminal justice studies, and he found himself curious about why this well-spoken young man was studying such a subject. "Mr. Rivera, you're studying criminal justice?" "Yes, Your Honor. But more specifically, I'm majoring in social work with a concentration in criminal justice," Anthony replied. "My goal is to become a probation officer and work with at-risk youth, helping them avoid the mistakes I made when I was younger." The mention of past mistakes and current career goals focused on helping others immediately captured Judge Caprio's interest. This was clearly not a typical parking citation case, and the judge sensed that there was a meaningful story behind Anthony's presence in his courtroom. "Tell me about these mistakes you mentioned, Mr. Rivera," Judge Caprio said gently, his tone indicating genuine interest rather than judgment. Anthony had prepared for this moment, knowing that his honesty about his past would be crucial to explaining his current circumstances and demonstrating the transformation he had undergone. "Your Honor, 3 years ago I was arrested for drug distribution charges. I had dropped out of high school, was involved with a gang, and was heading down a path that would have led to prison or worse. I was angry, irresponsible, and convinced that the world owed me something." The courtroom had grown noticeably quieter as other defendants and spectators found themselves drawn into Anthony's account. Here was a young man voluntarily discussing serious criminal charges in the context of a parking violation hearing, demonstrating a level of self-awareness and honesty that was rare in any legal proceeding. Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, clearly intrigued by this unexpected turn in what he had assumed would be a routine hearing. "What changed, Mr. Rivera?" Anthony's expression grew more serious as he continued his story. "I was assigned to a probation officer named Maria Santos, who refused to give up on me even when I had given up on myself. She challenged me to think about what I wanted my life to look like and whether my choices were taking me in that direction. But the real turning point came when I was doing court-ordered community service at an elementary school." The judge leaned forward, sensing that Anthony was approaching the heart of his transformation story. "I was working with children from backgrounds similar to mine, Your Honor, and one day a little boy named Miguel asked me if I was going to go to jail like his father did. That question hit me harder than any lecture or threat of punishment ever had, because I realized that my choices weren't just affecting my future, They were influencing children who looked up to me and might follow my example. Judge Caprio felt his own emotional response to Anthony's words, recognizing the profound impact that moment must have had on a young man who was already questioning his life choices. How did that realization change your behavior? Everything. Changed after that, Your Honor, Anthony replied, his voice growing stronger with conviction. I completed my GED, enrolled in college, and completely separated myself from my previous lifestyle and associates. I've been working with at-risk youth for the past 2 years, trying to provide them with the positive male role model I wish I had when I was their age. Judge Caprio was clearly moved by Anthony's account, but he also wanted to understand the connection between this remarkable transformation and the parking citation that had brought Anthony to court. Mr. Rivera, this is an incredible story of personal growth and dedication to helping others, but help me understand why you're contesting a $40 parking fine instead of simply paying it. Anthony's response revealed both his financial constraints and his desire to be completely honest with the court. Your Honor, I'm currently taking 18 credit hours while working part-time at a youth center. Every expense has to be carefully budgeted, and the $40 represents money I had planned to spend on textbooks for next semester. But beyond the financial aspect, I requested this hearing because I wanted to explain that I wasn't being careless or disrespectful. I stayed in class because we were discussing rehabilitation versus punishment in criminal justice, a topic that's deeply meaningful to me given my background. Judge Caprio found himself impressed not just by Anthony's honesty about his financial situation, but by his commitment to his education and his desire to participate meaningfully in discussions that related to his career goals and personal experience. Mr. Rivera, the judge said, his voice reflecting genuine admiration. In 30 years on this bench, I rarely encounter someone who has made such a complete transformation of their life and dedicated themselves so thoroughly to helping others avoid the mistakes they made. Your honesty about your past, your commitment to your education, and your work with young people represent exactly the kind of rehabilitation and personal growth that our justice system should encourage. Anthony felt a sense of relief and gratitude as he heard Judge Caprio's words, but he maintained his respectful posture as he waited to hear the judge's decision regarding his citation. Judge Caprio sat quietly for a moment, processing the extraordinary story he had just heard and the remarkable young man who stood before him. In his 3 decades of presiding over municipal court, he had encountered countless defendants who offered elaborate explanations for their violations. But Anthony Rivera represented something entirely different. A genuine example of human transformation and redemption that challenged every assumption about second chances and the possibility of authentic change. When Judge Caprio finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of emotion that surprised even his experienced court staff. Mr. Rivera, I want you to know that what you've shared with me today represents one of the most inspiring accounts of personal transformation I have ever heard in this courtroom. Your journey from drug dealer to social work student, your commitment to helping at-risk youth, and most importantly, your willingness to be completely honest about your past mistakes demonstrates a level of character and integrity that is truly remarkable. Anthony felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion as he heard the judge's words. Throughout his transformation process, he had grown accustomed to skepticism from people who knew his past, and even support from mentors like Maria Santos. Had sometimes felt tentative, as if people were waiting to see whether his change was genuine or temporary. To hear such unequivocal recognition and validation from a respected judge was profoundly meaningful. But Judge Caprio was far from finished with his response to Anthony's case. The judge stood up from his bench, a gesture that immediately commanded the attention of everyone in the courtroom, and began to speak with the kind of passionate conviction that had made him beloved by millions of viewers around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Caprio said, addressing not just Anthony, but everyone present in the courtroom, what we have witnessed here today is proof that redemption is real, that people can change, and that our justice system works best when it provides opportunities for rehabilitation rather than just punishment. His voice grew stronger as he continued. Mr. Rivera could have paid this parking fine and moved on with his life, but instead, he chose to appear in court and share his story because he understood that even small interactions with the justice system are opportunities to demonstrate the growth and responsibility he has achieved. The judge's words seemed to resonate through the courtroom, touching other defendants and spectators who recognized they were witnessing something far more significant than a routine traffic citation hearing. Anthony stood quietly, overwhelmed by the public recognition of his transformation, but also humbled by the responsibility that such recognition carried. Judge Caprio returned his attention directly to Anthony, his expression reflecting both deep respect and genuine affection for the young man before him. "Mr. Rivera, I am not only dismissing this parking citation, but I want to do something more significant than that. Your story needs to be heard by other young people who are facing the same choices you faced 3 years ago." The judge reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to Anthony. "This is my personal contact information. I want you to call me next week because I'd like to arrange for you to speak to other young defendants who appear in this courtroom. Your story, your transformation, and your current dedication to helping others could be exactly what some of them need to hear to make better choices for their own lives." Anthony accepted the card with hands that trembled slightly, hardly able to believe that Judge Caprio was offering him an opportunity to expand his advocacy work and share his message of hope and change with other young people in the justice system. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished with his unprecedented response to Anthony's case. "Furthermore, Mr. Rivera, I understand that you're working part-time while carrying a full-course load, and that financial constraints are affecting your ability to purchase textbooks and other educational materials. I want you to know that there are scholarship opportunities and educational assistance programs specifically designed for students like you who are using their education to give back to their communities." The judge turned to address his court clerk with specific instructions. "I want you to connect Mr. Rivera with the Providence Community Foundation's Second Chance Scholarship Program and also with the Rhode Island Department of Corrections Educational Partnership Programs. Someone with his background and current trajectory should have access to every possible resource to support his academic and career goals." Anthony felt overwhelmed by the comprehensive support Judge Caprio was offering, but the judge still had more to say about the significance of what he had witnessed that morning. "Mr. Rivera," Judge Caprio continued, his voice growing more emotional, "I want you to understand something important. 3 years ago, when you were arrested for drug distribution, you could have become just another statistic, another young man whose potential was wasted because of poor choices and lack of opportunities. Instead, you chose the much harder path of genuine change, authentic accountability, and dedicated service to others." The judge paused, removing his glasses to wipe away tears that he no longer tried to hide. "Your transformation hasn't just changed your own life. It has created a ripple effect that has influenced every child you've mentored, every young person you've taught, and everyone who has witnessed your commitment to becoming a better person. That kind of impact is immeasurable and invaluable to our community." Judge Caprio's voice grew stronger as he delivered what would become one of the most memorable speeches in his courtroom's history. "Mr. Rivera, you mentioned that you want to become a probation officer like Maria Santos, who helped change your life. I want you to know that you already are changing lives, and that your future work in the criminal justice system will be informed by the kind of personal experience and genuine understanding that cannot be taught in textbooks or learned in classrooms." The standing ovation that erupted in the courtroom was spontaneous and heartfelt, with other defendants, court officers, clerks, and spectators rising to their feet to honor Anthony's transformation and Judge Caprio's recognition of his achievement. Anthony stood quietly, tears streaming down his cheeks as he absorbed the reality that his worst mistake had ultimately led him to this moment of recognition and opportunity. Judge Caprio came out from behind his bench and approached Anthony directly extending his hand not just in congratulation, but in recognition of their shared commitment to justice and rehabilitation. "Mr. Rivera, I am honored to have met you today, and I look forward to working with you to share your message with other young people who need to hear that change is possible, that second chances can be earned, and that their past mistakes do not have to define their future potential." As they shook hands, Judge Caprio added quietly, "You have proven that the best advocates for change are those who have experienced it themselves. Your voice, your story, and your continued commitment to helping others will make a difference in ways you cannot yet imagine." The transformation that began in Judge Caprio's courtroom that spring morning continued to unfold in ways that exceeded everyone's expectations, creating ripples of positive change that extended far beyond Anthony Rivera's personal journey and touched countless lives throughout Providence and beyond. As word of his remarkable story spread through the community and eventually across social media platforms, Anthony found himself at the center of conversations about redemption, second chances, and the transformative power of genuine mentorship and opportunity. Within days of his court appearance, Anthony received the call from Judge Caprio's office that would launch the next phase of his advocacy work. The judge had arranged for Anthony to speak to a group of young defendants appearing in municipal court, offering them the same kind of hope and practical guidance that Maria Santos had provided for him 3 years earlier. Anthony's first presentation to a group of teenagers facing various charges was both nerve-wracking and exhilarating, as he discovered that his story resonated powerfully with young people who recognized their own struggles and potential in his account of transformation. "3 years ago, I was sitting where you're sitting now," Anthony told the group of young defendants, his voice carrying the authenticity that can only come from lived experience. "I thought the system was against me, that I didn't have any real choices, and that people like us were destined for prison or worse. But I learned that the biggest prison isn't the one with bars. It's the one we build in our minds when we convince ourselves that we can't change." The response from the young people who heard Anthony speak was immediate and profound. Several approached him after his presentation to ask specific questions about how to break away from negative influences, how to find educational opportunities, and most importantly, how to believe in their own capacity for change when everyone around them seemed to have given up on their potential. The scholarship connections that Judge Caprio had facilitated proved to be game-changing for Anthony's educational journey. The Providence Community Foundation's Second Chance Scholarship not only covered his remaining tuition costs, but also provided him with a laptop computer and funding for textbooks, eliminating the financial stress that had been a constant concern throughout his college experience. More significantly, the scholarship program connected him with a network of mentors and supporters who understood the unique challenges faced by students overcoming criminal backgrounds. Anthony's academic performance, freed from the burden of financial anxiety, improved dramatically during his 3rd semester. He made the dean's list while maintaining his work at the youth center and expanding his speaking engagements to include high schools, community organizations, and even juvenile detention facilities. His professors, impressed by the depth of insight he brought to discussions about criminal justice reform, began incorporating his perspectives into their curriculum and encouraging him to consider pursuing graduate studies in social work or criminal justice. The story of Anthony's transformation and Judge Caprio's compassionate response had been captured on video and shared widely online, attracting millions of views and thousands of comments from people who were moved by the demonstration of authentic change and judicial wisdom. The video became a powerful tool for criminal justice reform advocates who used Anthony's story to illustrate the effectiveness of rehabilitation-focused approaches versus purely punitive responses to criminal behavior. 6 months after his court appearance, Anthony returned to Judge Caprio's chambers for a follow-up visit that had become a regular part of their ongoing mentoring relationship. The young man who walked into the judge's office was visibly more confident and mature, carrying himself with the quiet authority that comes from someone who has found his purpose and is actively pursuing it. "Judge Caprio," Anthony said, presenting. The older man with a framed certificate. "I wanted to show you my transcript from last semester. I made the dean's list, and I couldn't have done it without the opportunities you created for me." The pride in his voice was evident, but so was his humility and recognition that his success had been built on the support and belief of others. Judge Caprio examined the transcript with the same attention he would give to any important document, his face breaking into a broad smile as he saw Anthony's academic achievements. "Anthony, this is outstanding work, but I want you to know that these grades represent more than just academic success. They represent your commitment to personal growth, your dedication to helping others, and your determination to make the most of the second chance you've earned." During their conversation, Anthony shared news that particularly delighted Judge Caprio. He had been accepted into a summer internship program with the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, working directly with juvenile offenders in a rehabilitation-focused program. The position would provide him with practical experience in the field he planned to enter, while also allowing him to continue sharing his story with young people who needed to hear that change was possible. "The best part," Anthony told the judge, "is that Maria Santos recommended me for the position. She said that my transformation from defendant to advocate represents exactly the kind of perspective the department needs in its reform efforts." The circular nature of his journey, from Maria's probation client to her professional colleague and partner in helping other young people, represented the kind of redemption story that justified every judge's faith in the possibility of human change. 1 year after his parking citation hearing, Anthony Rivera graduated magna cum laude from the Community College of Rhode Island and was accepted into Rhode Island College's Bachelor of Social Work program with a full scholarship. His graduation ceremony was attended by Judge Caprio, Maria Santos, several of the young people he had mentored, and staff members from the youth center where he continued to work and volunteer. Anthony's commencement speech, delivered as the student representative for his graduating class, focused on the theme of second chances and the responsibility that comes with them. He spoke about the importance of recognizing that everyone has the capacity for growth and change, regardless of their past mistakes, and that society benefits most when it provides opportunities for redemption rather than simply punishment. "I stand before you today not as someone who overcame his past, but as someone who learned to transform his past into a foundation for serving others," Anthony told the graduation audience. "Every mistake I made, every poor choice that brought me to the lowest point in my life has become a tool for connecting with and helping young people who are facing similar struggles. That's the real power of second chances. They don't just change the person who receives them, they create the opportunity for that person to change others." 2 years later, Anthony Rivera achieved his goal of becoming a probation officer assigned to work specifically with juvenile offenders in the same courthouse where Judge Caprio had recognized his transformation and offered him unprecedented support. His first day on the job included a visit to Judge Caprio's chambers, where he thanked the judge one more time for seeing potential in a young man who had almost given up on himself. "You know what I've learned, Judge?" Anthony said during that visit. "The most powerful form of justice isn't punishment or even forgiveness. It's the recognition of human potential and the provision of opportunities for people to become their best selves. You gave me that recognition and those opportunities, and now I get to do the same thing for other young people every day." Judge Caprio, now in his 70s but still presiding over cases with the same passion and compassion that had made him beloved, smiled as he reflected on Anthony's journey. "Anthony, you've proven something that I've believed throughout my career, that the purpose of justice isn't just to punish wrongdoing, but to create the conditions where people can choose to do right. Your story will continue to inspire other young people to believe in their own capacity for change, and that impact will extend far beyond anything we can measure." The parking ticket that had brought Anthony Rivera back to court had been transformed into something far more significant than a simple citation hearing. It had become the catalyst for a mentoring relationship that demonstrated the transformative power of judicial compassion and the ongoing potential for human redemption. Anthony's story proved that sometimes the most profound justice comes not from punishment, but from recognition, opportunity, and the unwavering belief that every person deserves the chance to write a better ending to their story.